Today's date is April 12th, 2016. My name is Leah Michelle Cash, and I am interviewing Mr. Roger Schmidt for the archiving project in the Inland Empire project. His name is spelled. Can you spell your first name, last name for
Sure.
us?
R-O-G-E-R, Roger, Schmidt, S-C-H-M-I-D-T.
Thank you. We are interviewing here in the home of Wilma Carter and Rutibu in the city of Rialto, California. So thank you, Mr. Smith, for taking the time out to conduct this interview with us. So, being our honored guest, you are the author of an outstanding book, which is really something that is very special. The Blue and the Gray, San Bernardino Valley College Sports. And you have documented history from 1926 to 2011. But before we get into your book, I want you to tell me or tell us a little bit about how you got to the Inland Empire and a little bit about your life.
Well, I came here with my father in 1948 to San Bernardino from Lincoln, Nebraska. I'd been kicked out of high school in Lincoln, and it seemed like since my father was coming west, maybe it'd be a good idea for me to start over in San Bernardino. And it was a good idea. I had very good instruction at San Bernardino High School, and so that was, it worked out.
So, how did you get into being a professor?
Well, I wasn't an outstanding student in high school. I had perhaps as many D's as I had C's, and the only A's I ever got was in physical education, unless I had exceptional eyesight and got a B in English once when I copied off the student next to me or something. But I arrived in California, and after graduating in 1949 from San Bernardino High, I played baseball and softball during the summer, and my parents always believed that I ought to be employed, preferably for money. And well, when September rolled around, I still wasn't employed. So I went to Valley College, and they had a counselor. And he said, well, you didn't get tested much in those days. And he talked about something called business administration. I'd never heard the word business connected with administration in my life to that point. So the next day I joined the military rather than going to college because it was too intimidating. Now, I had a very good fortune at the military in the sense that when I went down to join the Army, we weren't at war, and the person who did the recruitment for the Army also recruited for the Air Force. And he said, why, you are Air Force material because you graduated from high school. Of course, miserably I graduated, but I graduated. And so they put me in the Air Force. Well, I've never been very good at the problems I had in high school had to do with controlling my temper and disobedience. And in the military, that probably isn't a good combination either. So I did rather well at what I was trained to do, which is cryptography, to decipher messages and things during the Korean War. But I also would occasionally have run-ins with authority when, well, for example, I was supposed to go to gas mask drill. Well, I didn't go, I just slept in. And the bad thing about that is I had 20 or 30 people I was in charge of, and none of them went either. So that caused a little stir, and I was restricted to base for 60 days, I think. And there were other occasions. But anyway, I got out of the military having learned a great many things that I didn't want to do with my life. Now, I love Japan. I was there for 27 months, and I even thought of staying there, except I didn't know what I would do if I stayed there. And I came back home. I went to Valley College, and the same counselor was there. But this time I knew what I wanted to take. And I signed up for the courses, and then in college I was a huge turnaround because my life had kind of turned around through religious experiences. And so I did very well in college. And at that time I thought I was going to be a minister. Well, that was a great disconnect. I graduated from the University of Redlands. You know, I could never get God on the phone. Well, in any case, I went to seminary and decided, you know, I don't really like what ministers have to do. They have to go to meetings all the time. And I don't, that's not my specialty. And so I thought, well, maybe I should be a teacher. And so I went to graduate school and started teaching at Paris Union High School in Riverside County, and then 4 years later, through the old, you know, the white man's buddy system, I was hired at the University of Redlands. And in those days, most of the faculty was white and male, and there I went. And I taught there from 1963 to 93, and I had reasonable success there. And then, against my mother's advice, I decided to retire. She said, well, don't you like teaching? I said, I've been doing it for 30 years. Enough's enough. Mm-hmm. But my mother said, stay in the fight, stay in the ring. To have something to do is a wonderful thing. This is the kind of thing my mother raised me on. You know?
Okay.
Oh, yeah. And so then I retired, but I'd been, a Buddhist institution wanted me to come and teach at the college, and I did that, and I was a dean there and had other offices, and then retired for good sometime around 2003. Mm-hmm. So that's how I came to be whatever. That's a circuitous answer to your question.
Well, that is quite an experience. Let me tell you, you have something to say. And also, you can throw in there an honorary doctorate.
Yes, yeah.
And you received an honorary doctorate from where?
The University of the West, which is this Buddhist-affiliated school in Los Angeles. It was the second, well, in Rosemead, which is, you know, outside of Los Angeles. And it was the second Buddhist-affiliated university in the U.S. to be fully accredited. In other words, it has the same level accreditation that UCLA and USC have.
Does.
It's just a tiny school. But we awarded PhDs and all that kind of stuff.
Well, congratulations on that special achievement. Now we're going to move on to the book. So now that we've got a sample of your very full life, I'm really imagining this question, because the question is, what endeared you to accomplish the huge, monumental task of publishing a book that documents 85 years of sports history in the Inland Empire? Where did you get that idea?
Well, my wife thought it was a sickness that had come upon me, but I will say that I have a national reputation for writing in other areas, like books, like exploring religion and those kinds of things. Exploring religion was adopted in 47 of 50 states by universities and colleges. Mm-hmm. used in Great Britain and other countries. So this is a deviation, this sports history.
Yes, it is.
From what my main thrust. The other one was a paying gig. This one was, sports
Passion.
history was just a gift to the college. And how did it happen? Like most things in my life, I don't plan for them, they just pop up. And in the evenings sometimes in the 1980s, I would listen to Vin Scully announce Dodger games. And Vin Scully was saying in, his commentary, well, Chaffey College has a lot of professional baseball players. So I'm half asleep and I'm thinking, San Bernardino Valley College had a lot of professional baseball players. Well, one thing led to the next another, and I was writing about archery and boxing, wrestling, and all the sports that have ever been competitive sports at the college.
Swimming.
And it started with baseball. And then, of course, you dig out the easiest thing to find, like football and baseball, because football occurs on a regular weekly basis. Then you know where to look in the newspaper to get the results. But boxing and those kinds of things are more serendipity. The newspaper, they don't, well, they had schedules. Obviously, the boxers had to show up. But you didn't necessarily know about it much. And so that's how it came about. A goofy thing with Finn Scully stimulating me to do something.
About the area that you lived in.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
Go Valley College, that's right.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so now, when you made this hard decision to do this research on 85 years history of the athletes, how did you begin to do the research? How did you begin to gather all your knowledge? How did you begin to dissect
it? I went to the local library in San Bernardino, the Rabbi Feldheim Library, and they have microfilm of the old newspapers, and I would go year by year reading old newspapers. And and at some point along the way, I met another person, Harry Fry, and he said, I'm doing research on that. So my wife thought, there are two freaks in the world. You met another one. And she asked Harry Fry about it. How can there be two people like that? He said, well, there are a lot of people like that around the country. So she just astounded that there could be people that would be reading these old musty things, And so I do that, and it gets addictive. And so that's how I did it.
So it got addictive.
Yeah.
And then in that addiction, did it take over your life? Were you writing once a week or 3 times a week or all week, or did it just consume you?
Well, I was the kind of guy who studied just the day before a test. So I neither drink nor smoke. So I'm not a daily addiction to writing. Although right now I spend an awful lot of time on writing projects. But so it wasn't a daily thing, because when you're working, and I was usually always not only a teacher but an administrator, I had to arrange other people's schedules, and then they would come and complain that the light was out in the men's toilet, as if I knew how to do that, fix that. I don't know. When you're an administrator, they ask you the dumbest questions, and thinking you can probably solve it because that's your job.
That's your job.
So I was much too busy to be writing every day.
Okay.
You just snuck it
But
in.
what
when you
was
could.
your routine?
I don't really. I have more of a routine now that I'm retired.
Okay.
So a lot
But
of this
then
was done in the summers because I never taught in the summers, and
Okay.
and that was true of the religion books as well as the sports history. So I never had a really regular routine. There's a guy at Valley College who's written 21 or 23 books. He'd get up at 4 in the morning
Mm-hmm.
and write before he came to school.
Mm-hmm.
I was never that disciplined.
Okay. So now,
Just pathetic.
once you had the meat of this book, how did you begin to group all the multiple athletes and all the different sports that we have in the Inland Empire? I know that was probably a difficult task.
Well, in a way, it just kind of, I decided to go through the sports and have a section on archery. At one time, Valley College had the second best archery team in the nation, among four-year colleges as well as two.
Mm-hmm.
They were second only to Arizona State University. And so I would do archery and then, you know, boxing. They quit boxing in the 30s. But I just proceed that way. Now, when I would write it, but I mentioned I started with baseball, so I probably had all that information before I ever had the boxing or wrestling. And Valley College was state champions in wrestling at least 6 years. And some of the great local athletes were wrestlers. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to group them around the sport, and then kind of follow up the athletes within that sport.
Okay.
And so it worked out that way.
So now tell us about your history with black athletes.
Okay. Well, I'm even more interested in that today. But I mentioned a couple of the black athletes who were wrestlers. Are Terry Hall, who was a two or three time All-American at Cal Poly, as well as a state champion at Valley College, and was an alternate on our Olympic team. I don't remember the exact year right now, but and then we had an athlete by the name of Tribble, who was on the Olympic team, and he had 96 or 93 matches, never lost one of them in 2 years, and he was an All-American at Arizona State University. And so I got familiar with them. Initially, Valley College, probably in the first 20 years, maybe even a little more than that of its existence, a black athlete was a rare, relatively rare, and almost never in team sports. In sports where, like track, where you ran your own event. You know, you didn't have to, because I think the environment didn't promote the notion of participation of black athletes in team sports much. So I think there was one black athlete in the first 20 years on the football team, one. And if you compared that to today, say you got, now you of course have 66 or 70 football players, probably maybe 18 or 20 of them at least would be African American. And then, so I got interested over time. Well, when was the first black athlete to make an all-conference team at Valley College in basketball? Mm-hmm. And then you that occurs then, well, what about football? And it turned out that when I graduated from high school in 1949 at San Bernardino High, that some of those athletes were among the first athletes at Valley to play team sports and to be named all-conference, like Atwood Granberry and the Manuel Early. He graduated, I think, around 1950, 1 year after I did. He was the first African-American to lead the football team in scoring. Now, if you looked at the records, the top 10 scorers in Valley College history, you know, probably the first, over half of them are probably African American.
Isn't that something?
And some of those were people who then played in the National Football League, like Perry Jeter, and the same would be true in basketball. If you have a 12-person basketball team now, you know, the whole team, at least 11 out of 12 are going to be African American, probably.
So is there any one of those African Americans in the ones that even graduated with you in your school year, did you ever divulge into their stories or their personal life, or is there any one of them that actually inspired you that you sometimes just think about?
Well, the most inspiring African American athlete that I ever knew was not local. He was a Harlem Globetrotter, but he played real basketball during World War II.
Oh.
When they, because he was in the military, and there were other All-Americans on the team, white and black, and this athlete was the finest athlete I'd ever seen in my life. I tried to be like him. Of course, the problem was, and he was not unusually tall. He was only 6'1" or 2", but his name's Reese the Goose Tatum. Before there was Meadowlark Lemon, there was Goose Tatum. And he could do all these tricks with the basketball, but he could shoot. He might take 30 shots, same shot, he'd maybe make 28 out of 30. He was amazing. He could dunk, he had long arms, he could dunk easily. Back in those days, no one dunked. You know what I mean? Except that, and he played for the Lincoln Air Force Base, you know, and good teams came around, and they played not the Globetrotter style. They played, you know, the regular competitive basketball.
Okay.
And he was also one of the most amazing baseball players I'd ever seen in my life as a first baseman. He played in the Negro Leagues, and then after the war, of course, he was the crown prince of the Globetrotters. And so it seemed kind of crazy to want to be Goose Tatum, but you know, since I couldn't jump worth a darn, and but I practiced his shot over and over and over and over.
Hey, we all dream.
I dream
big.
Yeah, right. Dream big. Yeah. Now the local athletes. I went to school with Perry Jeter at Valley College, and he was a star for the Chicago Bears later, and he was probably the first great African American football player at Valley College, where he just set that team was the national champions, and he set all kinds of records. And he hardly played because they beat up other teams so badly that at one point they even questioned, well, had he played enough minutes to win a letter? He led him in scoring and rushing and all that, but he hardly, you know, they kept substituting because they were just winning by such an enormous margin.
Wow.
And not only that, they didn't let the other team score either. So, but this was
That's how it was.
yeah, that was under a coach who was associated with bringing people from Pennsylvania and New York, and Perry Jeter was from Steubenville, Ohio, which is a famous football school and high school.
Okay. So now, gathering this book, at the end of the day, when it is published and it is completed, and you have this Bible here
Yeah,
of 85 years history
yeah.
of sports in the Inland Empire, because I just want to continue to stress how extraordinary that is. How did you feel, and what was your most inspiring accomplishment from doing that book, which is really quite extraordinary?
Well, I think the most gratifying results is how much it has meant to the athletes as they, read about themselves and know that somebody noticed, or whatever. So that's the gratifying part. And so in that process, then you get to meet the athlete, and so that's the best thing. The other thing, when you're an addict, you just keep right on writing and gathering data. So it's now up to 2016, but I've got 5 years of extra data now. But so the good thing about writing is you're never finished.
You're never finished.
So,
and that really leads up to my next question. What would you tell, or how would you inspire, and what would you say to someone who wanted to be an addict and, on the words of your wife, a little crazy,
yeah.
and take up continuing where you left off in regards to documenting the sports history of athletes in the Inland Empire?
Well, I took the advice that's typically given to writers, and it usually goes something like this. Write about, at least when you start out, write about something you know. Because it'll come much easier, the words and the sentences, and it'll hold together better. So I started by writing about education, writing articles for publication for journals and things. And then a book representative, they're always coming by the college trying to get you to adopt a book by their publisher. And they said, well, do you have an idea for a book? And I said, yeah, I do have an idea. I'd like to write an introduction to religion that's patterned after Introduction to philosophy. This wouldn't be a world religion, but to talk about religious experience and ritual and religious belief and symbolism, those kinds of things, rather than, say, have a chapter on Hinduism and Buddhism and that, which is the typical textbook. So they got my proposal and they said, okay, we'd like you to write. We'll give you a contract. I've never seemed to be a person that delivers a book in the time that the contract calls for. Usually goes on for 3 or 4 more years, and they hope they can squeeze it out of you. And my poor wife, she typed it up back in the age before computers, when you had to, if you made a mistake and stuff, you had to use whiteout or you had to start all over. It was just not easy, and no one can hardly read my writing, so she typed all this stuff, and by the time it came out, she was even beginning to hope maybe. See, I did it just merely to see if I could do it. That was motivation. Mm-hmm. The mountains there, climb it. Mm-hmm. what are professors supposed to do? They're supposed to write books.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, I'm going to take this on.
So how many years did it take you to write
Well,
the
it
Blue
might
and
have
Gray?
taken about 8 years.
8
I don't
years.
work all, you know, I had,
Ooh.
in the summers, I had to write it because in the regular school year,
That's a
I just
long
worked too
time.
hard to take time out to write much.
That's
So,
dedication.
and so I would use my summers to do that. And so we got published, and that proved that I could do it. But my wife then got to thinking, wouldn't it be nice if we made money? But after all this work, I'd like to have another agenda. Not just did you do it, but can we make some money? And of course we did, much to our surprise. But so that's my advice. Start with something you know.
No.
I mean, it may be very simple. You might just write little vignettes out of your own life because your family might like to know about, you know, what went on in your past. Mm-hmm. My one son can't figure out who his grandparents is hardly, you know. I mean, I try to explain these relationships, but he can't seem to keep it in his head. Mm-hmm. Now he's a professor himself. He teaches Spanish. You'd think he could keep straight. But anyway, write about what you know, and then proceed from that to more complex subjects. And that's about the only thing I know to recommend to a person as advice.
What is your legacy you're going to leave us with?
Well, I don't know about a legacy too much.
You're being modest.
I do have 2 sons. I have grandchildren. Those are a big part of our legacies often, and we're very proud of them. And books tend to live after you a little while. I hope to be remembered at least until my sons die.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even a granddaughter or 2. And but it's hard to be too puffed up about yourself when you teach at a 2-year college. Mm-hmm. I mean, on the hierarchy of things, you know, it's all messed up. It should be kindergarten should be the ace, right? They should be at the top of the teaching profession, and the first and second and so on. But it's the professors that are. So, but I'm at the bottom of the professor heap. If you're at a community college, you can't get too puffed up. But so, just, you know, a legacy that I didn't get thrown in jail. I survived teaching without being, you know, disciplined or brought before a student board. And this was happening in the last few years of my teaching, is that more and more teachers would, someone would lodge a complaint and they would have a hearing. So it's a great blessing to me to have finished my teaching career without it being too smudged.
Well, Mr. Schmidt, it's a great honor getting to know you and understanding this history that you have had regarding sports, and a good majority of it has also been dedicated to black athletes, and that is profound. And so with that said, we are very grateful that you're doing this interview today. It is our honor, and we'd like to invite you back another time. So
Okay.
Thank you for visiting us.
It's my pleasure, and thank you. Well, my life's been more a comedy.
I don't even know what to say at the end.
Stumbling.
I was getting